Hello, everyone. I'm Mark Plaster, the host of EP Talk, a place where emergency physicians come to talk about just about anything that's important to us. And my co-host is J.D. Landon, and my guests today are Resa E and Adaira Landry. Thank you both for coming.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Adaira and Resa just recently published a book through HarperCollins called MicroSkills, Small Actions, Big Impact. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, we want to talk about how you guys got together to write this book. I'll ask you first, who's it written for?
We get this question often, and we could say it's written for everybody, and we mean it. And also, we're not immune to the fact that certain audiences will resonate more than others. This is a business self-help book. It is written by women. It is written by physicians, but this is by no means a book for women or for physicians only. In preparing the book, we beta tested it a lot with readers, different ages, different stages, different industries. Firmly, this resonates well with the ready for college, the ready for work, and the early career professionals. That being said, our mid-career professional friends and colleagues, as well as late career friends and colleagues, resonate a lot and learn a lot. And even if they are not learning the MicroSkills for the first time, it's a reinforcement, and they think about how they can be better team members and allies for those younger colleagues.
Interesting. Resa, you are an educator at University of Alabama, correct? Birmingham?
Yeah.
And Adaira, you're in Boston at Harvard. How did you guys hook up?
I think this sort of speaks to the power of networking and building a network. I always say that, at least according to me, my most successful friends are the ones who are also the most connected. And so when I was looking for fellowships out of residency, I was connected to a few different people. Resa was one of those people, and we spoke about fellowships across the New England area. And then a year later or so, we met up again at a international conference, actually SMAC in Ireland, and had another conversation there. And then later, when I was, I think, going through a period of what do I want to do with my life, I reached out to Resa, and we discussed all sorts of topics related to just being a professional in medicine. And at that point, we sort of ended the conversation talking about, if you ever want to write, let's connect. And so I think I sort of took that exact moment and said, yes, let's think about a topic. And then shortly after, we wrote a piece on using social media to connect and to network. And that one actually was published in an academic outlet. And then from there, we thought about other topics like being efficient with how we mentor, writing letters of recommendation for yourself, being compassionate in how we email each other as a way to protect the team. And after each piece, we got a lot of public and positive support from people. And I've always wanted to write a book. And so I felt like the articles were like practice, like warm-ups for writing a book. But we knew that we wrote well together. And so it was a really great trial run, because writing a book is a lot of work. And so you would really want to practice first with your partner before you just say, let's do it. And so I think the articles were a really great entry point.
And where were you guys publishing these articles, just so everybody knows where to go find these?
So we both were pretty, I'll speak, brainwashed academic, meaning initially we started in academic PubMed type pieces, but soon we both realized, because of our networks, our worlds, wow, physicians can publish in mainstream outlets such as Fast Company, Harvard Business Review, Nature, Slate, Washington Post, New York Times. Now, we don't both have something in all of those, but there is a big movement for op-eds. There's a big movement for articles talking about the workplace in some of these mainstream outlets. And that's where we were landing. And that's where we developed this confidence, like, we're onto something here. And Mark, just to be clear, our denominator overlaps are we're emergency physicians, we are medical educators. Adaira actually has a master's in education from Harvard. We both are ultrasound fellowship trained. So, and we have a lot of people in common because much of this training was in the Northeast.
Gotcha.
The other thing about publishing in these outlets that we realized really early on is the turnover and the response time you can't even compare it to academia. You can write something on, a Monday, submit it the following day, and it's out that same week. That hardly ever happens in any academic outlet, that quick speed. And so that also became quite addicting. And I think when it comes to academia, if I wanted to publish something, I would submit it. I have to write a cover letter. I have to write all of the answers to all of these questions on the portal. And then it takes months to hear back. And then there's revisions and then months. It just takes forever, right? And so I think the most beautiful aspect of these larger lay presses to me is the speed. I'm going to also add the scale, because I do think that the readership also can't really compare, in that our CNBC pieces, that has like a readership of about 60 million monthly readers. And you can't compare that to any of even the top academic outlets aren't reaching those numbers.
Yeah.
We need an impact factor for CNBC.
Right?
A few years ago, you'd be surprised. We did a piece on the shooting in Las Vegas. And believe it or not, little EP Monthly got an award from the New York Times.
Wow, that's amazing.
We're recognized by the New York Times for that piece. And I thought, I didn't think anybody even read it, and here they're reporting it. So it is fascinating to see the crossover.
That speaks to the right article in the right outlet can be incredibly powerful. Yeah. So I actually think the fact that you put it, as an emergency medicine doc in an emergency medicine outlet, I bet that added a level of credibility that really helped sort of validate everything that you're writing about.
Yeah, it was interesting because I think David Brooks is the one who made the award. It is a Sydney Award, is what it's called, as the best of long form journalism. And
wow.
Yeah, and it was. They basically said, "You want to know what it's really like to be inside of an emergency room? Read this."
Wow, I have to read that now.
Yeah, but
congrats.
Thank you.
Mark, can I jump in?
Yeah,
I'm curious. Like, clearly you guys have this trajectory in academia and publishing. Was there a particular stimulus that you experienced? Or I feel like a lot of times when we are like, we need to talk about MicroSkills, we need to talk about protecting ourselves, cultivating a balance between work, life. Was there a particular stimulus that pushed you guys in this direction? Or was it a kind of a culmination over years of saying, we really need to have a broader, bigger discussion about this?
Adaira and I have some very similar experiences, some very different experiences, but there's a common thread that we wrote the book that we wish we had been given when we were starting out.
Yeah.
We both have gotten there. We're both ambitious. We're accomplished. Gosh, it could have been easier. It could have been more efficient. If people had only provided us some of these tips and tricks and pearls and pitfalls, and we want it to be easier, better, smoother, a more positive experience for people that read this book.
We also really start from a very personal level with everything we teach. And I think even when it comes back to the articles, they weren't just like random ideas. They were all born from problems. Like the article on building a compassionate email culture, I was really frustrated because we were getting a lot of emails where there were hundreds of people on the to line, and then everyone was replying all. And there's a specific example I use all the time. Resa, I don't think likes this because she always takes it out of the articles, about a potluck and how there was a potluck being planned on a Saturday, and everyone's like, I'm bringing the mashed potatoes, and I'm just like, why am I getting all of these emails? And it was just like, that was probably the aha moment for that article for me. And I don't remember if it was Resa who mentioned it first or me mentioned it first, but when we came to this idea of writing about email, it was just like, yes, because that was a pain point that I personally really felt. And it's so much easier to write things that you have personally experienced, and you have this like nuanced perception of it because you know those detailed pain points. So I think writing from a place that really centers on the things that bother you, that motivate you, that inspire you, like writing from that perspective of the self is really helpful.
I'll also say there's a shock factor. When we learn certain things, there is shock. And my example is writing your own letter of reference. I had just finished residency and I requested a letter of reference from my supervisor for a job application. And he said, okay, will you draft it for me? And I was in such shock. I thought he was cheating. I thought he was scudding me out. I thought it was illegal. Like, I thought perhaps I'd get in trouble because he had kind of walked a line in terms of, working the system. And I thought, and then come to find out that's actually quite common. And unless it actually is explicitly stated as illegal, that's kind of what people do. However, I've now fully on adopted it. Adaira and I wrote an article that we've been told is an article that many people share with their mentees about why actually we are the best people to write our own letter of reference as a draft, a first draft, not a final draft. I've, though, have had the experience of when someone asks me, saying, great, can you draft it? And they kind of also have the shock. And I smile. I'm like, listen, I recognize that shock. I had that same shock. Let me give you this article that Adaira and I wrote, and also it's common practice, and you're the best person to draft this, and here's why.
Yeah, it's kind of begin with the end in mind. That's something that people have talked a lot about, is where do you want to be? Sometimes, and when you assess yourself, it's an opportunity for you to sit down, and it's actually beneficial to write your own recommendation.
I was just going to say that was a perfect example of, if you know that small skill of writing your own letter, but it actually goes before that. The skill really is volunteering to write your own letter, because that lowers the threshold of someone else nominating you. Yep. And that was the context in which I learned about it. Was I noticed that my colleagues were deservedly getting nominated and awarded grants. They were getting these like leadership programs. They like just many things coming their way, and I was getting none of those. And it wasn't until I asked a colleague, like, how are you finding all of these people to drive your nominations and to like run this process for you? When they told me, no, I am doing all this. I'm writing the letter and I'm asking people to nominate me. So that's actually the most fundamental skill, is feeling comfortable advocating for yourself. The article just gives you the mechanics as well of like how to actually structure your own letter of recommendation. But at the most fundamental level, it's really just knowing that you can support yourself.
And Adaira, just going back real quick to your email culture, I love what you say there so much, and it's almost freeing to hear it, because there's almost a pang of like shame sometimes when you get these reply alls, and they're like, I just had it the other day where they're like, they send out a congratulations to somebody in our 150 person group, and everybody's genuinely happy, but then you get 15 congrats in the same reply all, and then you're like annoyed, delete. But you're like, inside, you're like, I kind of feel like a jerk that like I'm like deleting it and annoyed for. So there's this like almost shame thing, and it's so. I love how you termed in here in your guys' promo, this idea of compassionate email culture, and it's like nobody's out there, being upset or angry when we get this reply alls, but it's like we're already taxed. We all have limited emotional bandwidth. It's like that little tiny compassionate bit of care. Like, who knows how far that's actually going for an organization.
Kudos to Resa. She's really great at coming up with these like tags for that. So the compassionate email culture was Resa's idea, and I loved it. And exactly right. Like, it's not a matter of anyone being, well, I was a little bit upset about the potato salad one, but like overall, I love it when I see the congratulations too. But if you were to drop everyone down in that email to BCC, and leave the recipient on the to line or something, I can just reply directly to that the person who won the award and say, I'm so happy for you, congratulations. And that's probably all that they need. I don't think everyone needs this like public show all the time. And so I think if you were just able to just bring all those people down to BCC, and then you can reply directly to the winner or the person who's getting the recognition, that would be fine.
One of the things you guys talk a lot about is time management. Okay. And I think that you two would probably be able to echo this or affirm this, that as women, you probably are more time challenged than there's more expected of you than I think men. I know when I come home, I'm not required to do a lot at home. Okay. I hate to say that, but I'm not. Okay. But that's probably not the case with either one of you. And so I think that there's a great deal of work-life balancing that has to happen in order for you to write and to do things like we're doing here.
So, Dr. Plaster, we thank you for that observation. And actually, it leads right into us talking about when we were figuring out how to write this book, where to start from. And in the introduction, we really put out 3 truths. And one is regarding time, that time can only be spent. And we were talking about currency, writing as a currency. There's a lot of currencies that we deal with that's not financial currency. There's publishing and writing that's currency. Threaded throughout the book, we talk about time as currency and that time can only be spent. You can't put it in a savings account. And if you don't spend time on one thing, it'll be on something else. In the emergency department, we do a lot of task switching in terms of time, and we can easily fill time. And it's sort of a heed to the reader that you should be really intentional and careful how you spend your time and with whom you spend your time. There are 2 other truths that we start with in the book. One is that everybody does not start at the same place. The world is not equal. And that's to say that we all have different upbringings, different inherited resources, financial, educational, all the above. And so everybody's not starting at the same place. So in writing this book, which sometimes we refer to as a workplace playbook, we're trying to even the playing field and get everybody to start at the same start line. And then finally, learning is limitless if only accessible. And we talk about, everybody wants to learn, everybody wants to grow, everybody wants to thrive in the workplace. But is that learning accessible, and how can we create that accessibility for everybody?
And I think what separates our book out from a lot of others is we really are trying to remove assumptions about who our reader is. And also we understand that, yes, we are physicians and there's a lot of financial privilege. We have a network because of that profession as well that provides us a lot of privilege. And we have a lot more control over our time if we want to be part-time, not compared to other people in the world. And so we understand that, and yet we don't assume that of our readers. So we talk a lot about budgeting time. We talk about outsourcing when you have the finances versus just saying, go out and hire these people, go out and get an MBA. Not everyone can just go get an MBA, right? And so when we write the book, even though we know where we are now, we remember where we were when we first started, and that was less supported, less guided, less nurtured. All of those things we try to weave in throughout this book and just recognize that it is really hard being successful. And yet we also feel like, success doesn't require self-sacrifice. And that's really important to us as we read the book, is just to normalize that developing and growing is challenging.
What does that look like? Like when you say success doesn't require self-sacrifice, I'm early in my career. I'm only out of residency 3 years. I also did an ultrasound fellowship. Woo, love POCUS. And I'm sitting here staring down the barrel of just finished an application for a faculty position, as well as an ultrasound academic position, as well as I'm a part of the Naval Reserves and getting into this kind of resuscitation thing. I have 4 kids now. My wife cares about my time. And I'm sitting here thinking these are all good things, right? But I am looking at the time, I am not nearly efficient enough to be good at all these things. I completely agree with Mark. My wife is a superhero, literally a superhero. And I'm I don't know how in the world you guys have done and accomplished as much as you have on top of also being women. And I know at least one of you are mothers. I saw Adaira, 3 daughters. Amazing. And I can't imagine how much work that is on top of all of your other work. Speak to that for me. How have you guys gotten to where you are?
Well, I can say that I'm very honest and open when people ask me about my time management. My kids are the priority and they take a lot of time. Oh. And I will say this, in order to take care of my kids, I have to take care of myself. So that's another layer. And I also have to take care of my marriage. So it's actually taking care of Adaira, taking care of my marriage, then taking care of the kids. That's all the priority. It didn't hit me right away. There was a point in time where I had 3 positions. I was an APD, I was an ultrasound fellowship director, and I was an advisor for the medical school, and I had 2 children. And I tell the story a lot, but it's the most clear picture of what chaos looks like, which was I was invited to give a lecture at like 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock in the evening, and it was on work-life balance. Now, I felt drawn to give this lecture, or to be part of this panel rather, because I felt like I needed lines on my CV. No one was telling me what is valuable, what is not valuable. So I was just sort of picking everything up, right? The say yes to everything, because I didn't really know what was a strategic choice or not. So I said yes to this because I felt like this was going to be good for my CV, for my professional development. And so the night of the panel, I have my two kids at home. One was 3 years old. The other one was 1 or so. And I'm, pushing them out of the room because I'm coming in to give this panel, and they're trying to get into the room. They're opening the doors, and I literally have to push like one of these sorts of dressers here against the wall to barricade them out. And I go back to my desk, and I'm like answering questions and things like that, and they're banging on the door, "Mommy, let me in!" And I was still nursing, so like my 1-year-old was like asking for milk, like oh. And the panelist literally was like, "Adaira, can you tell me about work-life balance?" And that was literally the aha moment for me, where I was just like, okay, this isn't working for anyone. And I made a very, very, very concrete, measurable change like that day, which was I will not take any meetings from 6 to 9 p.m. because that is when my kids are awake. And it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it to have them at home. And I'm trying to balance the two. But that very rigid choice was incredibly freeing, because now I know when someone says, "Hey, can you meet at 7?" Like I cannot, because I just know it's too hard. And I went from there to then stretching it out to weekend meetings. So now I don't do weekend meetings. There's like 1 or 2 exceptions to both of these rules. But for the most part, I say no. And I'm happy saying no, because I know that it's going to be a better day for me. And the joy of missing out, JOMO, we talk about in the book, like being happy to say no is a skill in itself as well.
We start with talking about the self and the importance of taking care of the self. And in fact, chapter 1 is MicroSkills for self-care. Our premise is that only in taking care of yourself are you really ready to help take care of the team and be a good team member, and also then ultimately take care of the work. And medicine does not teach us how to take care of ourselves. And we're not the only industry. In fact, every industry we've beta read, or people have beta read on our behalf, they're like, yep, same in our industry. Yep, same in our industry. So we're onto something. And we really break down these micro skills. Self-care is not just taking care of your body. We think health is also financial health, mental health, calendar health. There are many ways to take care of yourself. And that boundary, that structure that Adaira just described is spot on in terms of taking care of yourself.
As an attorney, I've actually seen major mistakes made in the emergency department by people who came in and they weren't prepared to go to work in their head because of something that was going on at home, and major problems developed because of it. So you're absolutely correct.
I also think that plays right in, Mark, to, in the last year, I just spent a year doing nights only at a very busy shop down here in Virginia, and sleep all of a sudden became like the highest commodity in my life. Like I reoriented my entire thought process. I stopped drinking alcohol completely. I bought an overly expensive cooling, pad for my bed. Like I have 5 components to my sleep setup. And it was amazing that I never realized the detriment of poor sleep. And I think that just kind of gets wrapped up into this self-care. I think back to residency. I'm like, oh my gosh, like my sleep habits. And I had 2 kids in residency, third right at the end. And I can't imagine how much potentially better I would have performed, or maybe been more productive, had I actually been tending to some of those fundamentals.
You're spot on. And in the book, I actually have a story where I talk about being very late to the sleep is health story. And part of it is in medicine, we're rewarded for not getting a lot of sleep. People actually boast about not getting a lot of sleep and getting by on it. And, one of the stories I tell is driving home and hoping there'd be no stop signs, no red lights, because I didn't want to nod off driving. And also I worked for a while in Manhattan, and I made the mistake of sitting down on the subway and waking up in Queens as opposed to getting off at my stop in Manhattan. There was, it's funny, and it's like, wow, I was full on board with that. And then same, I turned it around. Adaira and I just published a piece in CNBC about sleep tips that we have slowly over time built in to try to be really, really good sleepers.
And I think what you mentioned earlier is important about the regimen. Like, everyone has a different regimen, and that's okay. In this box right here behind me, like, that's like all of my sleep stuff, like my lavender oils, eucalyptus sprays. Like, it just really helps me. But I think you're right when it comes to like our residency training, and even you can argue some parts of medical school. It's really early on where it's just like, hey, sorry, you're just not going to sleep well this month. Yeah. And you're like, oh, is that a thing? Yeah, that's part of our specialty. Like, you might not sleep that well. And you say, oh, okay, if I want to do this surgical specialty or whatever specialty it is, I need to learn that I'm not going to sleep as well as if I were to take a different specialty, for instance. And it just becomes part of the culture. And then you accept it that, like, if you're going into this field, you have already been told it's going to be hard. So now you can't complain about changing the system. Right. And you just have to either accept it or get out. And I think, unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of that latter choice where people are like, I just can't sustain it because it's such an easier option than changing a culture.
Yeah. The next question really segues into that, because it was asking you how the MicroSkills fits into the broader context of our burnout and depression and substance use and abuse, even suicide among physicians. And you're absolutely correct. I mean, I'm old enough in practice that I can see faces when I read through those: depression, substance abuse, suicide. I know people, my colleagues.
Your question and observation is prescient, and Adaira and I are working on a piece right now. There's no way individually that we're going to be able to change this massive culture, and it's going to be slow and incremental, and it's going to take time. But we really think that as individuals, we have some agency. And some of the stuff we just talked about, sleep. Another is eating and making sure we take time to eat, and not just eat, but eat healthy food. We actually wrote an article about healthy snacks to have on shift as well. The other big one, which is a big one for Adaira and for myself, is calling in when sick. We don't do that, right? We don't do that.
No, we do not.
I was infected with COVID pre-vaccination, and there was all sorts of feelings surrounding that, getting infected and having to call out because it was mandated, CDC, hospital policy. And there's a sick call schedule in place, so someone was able to work the shift, blah, blah, blah. We all know, but still, we don't do it. And thankfully, I think COVID has changed things, hopefully in a good way. One more thing, we all joke about, we all have the colleagues that have walked around on shift with an IV in their arm because of their migraine headache, right, or their food poisoning, or their hyperemesis gravidarum. And when we talk to people outside medicine, they're like, wait a minute, you do what? People do what? And we're like, yep. Or go into a dark room, lights off, close your eyes to see if the migraine can go away for a bit. It's really what we do.
I don't know if you know, but I spent my whole 90% of my career working at night. And I wrote a book about it. And I'm old school. I'm 72. And when I started doing this 30 years ago, ERs were in the round. I don't know if you can recall any of the ERs that are like that. And all the workstations were stand up, and they were 12-hour shifts. And so we took it as a matter of pride that you did not sit down for 12 hours. You did not eat. You had to run to the bathroom. And at the end of 12 hours of a busy shift like that, of just pounding coffee, no food, just pounding coffee, I would lay down in a bed and literally just buzz. And I'm telling you, that's not a good way to live. Mm-mm. And I think, you want to know the truth? I'm going to go back to this sex thing. It's women coming into emergency medicine has wised up a bunch of guys, because we thought we could power through this. It was kind of sign of manhood. Okay. I did 14 straight 12-hour night shifts. I mean, that's insane.
Yeah.
And I think probably made some mistakes during that time period.
And just circling back, when we're asked about this, when we've been giving other podcasts and other interviews, outside of healthcare, people are aware of burnout and depression in medicine. Sometimes they're not aware that some of the highest rates are in emergency medicine. And to your point, we see it firsthand. Thank goodness it's being talked about. Thank goodness there's now legal policies sort of against it, and sort of all the shame that has accompanied doctors talking about mental health and about taking a break and all these things. Like, thank goodness things are changing, but going back to the first sentence, like, it's slow. Change is slow. So I think we need to figure out individually how to take care of ourselves and therefore take care of each other.
And speaking of the each other part, we do mention a lot about self-care. And one aspect that comes up often in the book is really assembling people around you who can support you. I think a lot of the burnout and all of the sequelae of that, depression, suicide, addiction, attrition, can come from feeling isolated and also as if you were the only one. And so we bring up in multiple parts of the book the value of having, you might have heard it as a personal board of directors, a go-to team, your people, but just this squad of folks who you can turn to for various different reasons. They have different skill sets, they have different proximities to you, but they're just the folks you turn to when you are in need, and how they can help normalize whatever it is you're going through. That's like really important. I would say that the hardest part of my career was, I would say, medical school and part of residency where I really didn't have that trusted network. And I didn't really know who I could talk to about my most vulnerable thoughts, because if you don't know who's an identified, trusted, or safe space, like, you just sort of keep everything to yourself, especially because there's still a lot of stigma in regards to, mental health in general. And if your mental health is in a crisis, like, who do you turn to that's not going to report you, that's not going to document something? I mean, that's really scary for individuals.
Yeah.
And so, I think we emphasize that heavily because we just think personally, I think from my experience, from Resa experience, it's just so important to have that network. And they're not there just to accelerate your career. They're there to keep you healthy and feeling validated.
I'm looking back at my career of working alone at night. The only doc, I never worked double coverage. It was always single coverage, and I never had that. And I think that some of the craziness in my life has been because of that. Tiny confession. But
I really think it'll be really interesting when you read cover to cover what you think and what you learned in terms of MicroSkills.
Well, certainly it's something I wish that I had read 35 years ago. I'll be looking forward to it. We're going to wind down this session, but I'm inviting you all, if you're game for it, to come back, and we'll talk about the actual headings that you tried to hit in MicroSkills. And if you're good for that, we'll end today's program, and we'll come back and talk about the specifics.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you so much.
Well, I look forward to it. And those of you who are watching this, don't miss the next session. We're going to have a good time talking about the actual MicroSkills that can make your life better. So thank you for joining us at EP Talk.
Bye for now.